Hello and welcome back to my garden. I don't know about you, but where I live, it has been a particularly wet, dark, and kind of gloomy winter, and I am so very ready for some sun. And I don't think any plant better symbolizes summer sun than the humble strawberry. So today, let me show you exactly how to plant these beautiful strawberries into containers. And in case you're on the fence about that, I actually prefer to plant strawberries into containers over putting them in the ground. If you're a beginner strawberry gardener, I think today's video will be perfect for you because I'm gonna cover everything from the type and size of container to select, the soil they grow best in, how to feed them, how to water them, and of course, plenty more than that. So let's get started. Alrighty, the first most important thing we need to talk about is the container. So strawberries are a little bit weird, and specifically they're weird because they don't have very deep root systems. Their roots tend to be a little bit shallower and very clumped together, but they don't go that far down. And what that means is you could totally plant it into my favorite type of container of all time, just a fabric grow bag or a smart pot, one of these, but you'd kind of be wasting a lot of soil because the roots really aren't going to penetrate past the 50% mark on something like that. And if that's okay with you, no worries, it's just not all that efficient. So what you'll find is most container strawberry growers are going to opt for something a little bit smaller, or at least a little bit shallower. So that can look like a really classic option, like one of these stacking planters, kind of makes what people call a strawberry tower, kind of a basic look, but to be honest, I like it. You can also go with something like this, which is plenty deep, and you could probably fit 2 to 3 strawberries in this, or you could even go with, you know, something smaller, something like the size of this little container here, and you could probably put 1 in here. Whatever you want, kind of up to you. It's certainly not gonna hurt to go with a bigger container like this one. In fact, this will work really, really well. I just don't wanna be that inefficient. Today, I am opting for the basic look of the strawberry tower. I think they come out kind of cool. Strawberries kind of remind me most of raspberries. That you have to strike a little bit of a delicate balance. And what I mean by that is if you let them get completely dry, they are gonna die. They don't stand up to dry conditions for any amount of time very well, kind of like a raspberry. But they're even more susceptible to root rot when they're sitting in overly wet conditions for too long. Now, the challenge with the smaller containers that I've just recommended, right, just got done recommending, is that they dry out really, really quickly. For instance, take this terracotta container. You could totally plant a strawberry in something like this, but in our hot summers, I would literally have to water this once to twice a day. Terracotta just doesn't hold on to water very well. So a better option in this case, and I know it's not the prettiest, but a better option is something made out of plastic. Right? Plastic is not particularly moisture permeable, so it holds onto the water for a little bit longer. And the other thing we can do, and which I've already done to my soil here, is add a little bit of extra vermiculite. Vermiculite just does a really nice job of holding onto that moisture without creating a soggy mess. I purchased just some super cheap potting mix, and I actually like the cheap potting mix because, at least for strawberries, it does a nice job of draining since it's basically just wood fines. It has a lot of woody material. So I've gone with like the cheapest potting mix I could find. I added some vermiculite, and that does a pretty nice job for strawberries. Also does a pretty nice job for raspberries for what it's worth. The other thing you could do is go with a standard DIY mix, say 2 parts sphagnum peat moss, that'll hold on to a lot of moisture, and then 1 part perlite, and then just a couple scoops of vermiculite. And that's gonna do a good job of sort of striking a similar balance, but it's gonna be a lot more expensive because perlite and sphagnum peat moss right now are out of control. Prices are absolutely out of control. So I've gone with a cheapo potting mix with some extra vermiculite in it, and that should work really, really well. Hey there, sorry for the interruption, but a quick request here. If you are finding this video helpful, would you mind clicking that like button down there for me real quick? It really helps us out. Thank you so much. And let's get back to these strawberry plants. Go ahead and Google, are strawberries heavy feeders? And what you'll find is every other result on Google is going to basically say the exact opposite thing. The first thing will say strawberries are heavy feeders, and the second thing will say strawberries are not heavy feeders. And so what I like to do is kind of turn to the experts in situations like this. So I referred to the Cal Ag department, which is made in conjunction with the University of California, Davis, and they've got a good strawberry fertilization section on there. And basically what their research has shown and their guidance indicates is it's a good idea to add some fertilizer directly into the potting mix, basically at the pre-plant step. So pre-plant fertilization just means that right before you put the plant into the ground, go ahead and make sure that you have fertilized that ground. So I'm gonna go ahead and sprinkle in some of just this organic fertilizer. This is just the Spoma Garden Tone, super standard, low nitrogen vegetable fertilizer. And I'm gonna go ahead and sprinkle in about, I would say 1/3 of a cup for a container this size. So for about, for about 3 strawberry plants, I'm gonna put in about 1/3 of a cup. And I think that'll be about right. Now, the other thing that you'll find if you do refer to the Cal Ag strawberry fertilizer guidelines, and I'll link them down below in the description, is strawberries are gonna want additional fertilizer throughout the season, particularly if you've gone with an ever-bearing variety like this one, because they're going to be bearing fruit more than once throughout the entire growing season, and I have a very long growing season. And that just means that every 1 to 2 months, or say twice throughout the growing season, in addition to this initial dose of fertilizer we're giving it, we're just gonna come through and we're gonna just side dress these plants with a little bit of extra fertilizer just to make sure they've got what they need. Really what they need at this point is nitrogen and phosphorus. Potassium, a little bit more finicky, but luckily the potassium sources in organic fertilizer like the Spoma Garden Tone, they're not gonna hurt the plant. So we can pretty safely go ahead and use that. If you're wondering if you should go ahead and pick up a berry specific fertilizer, I would probably say I wouldn't bother. It's gonna have maybe a little bit more nitrogen, maybe a little bit less phosphorus, and then it's gonna have more of a acidification agent. It's gonna do a better job of acidifying the soil. It's gonna have basically more sulfur in it. And that's great for something like blueberries. But for strawberries and raspberries, they like it moderately acidic, and just the normal fertilizer that we're putting in here, that's gonna do a little bit of that. And then really the potting mix that we bought is basically gonna be just slightly acidic anyways, or close to neutral. So we're pretty much good to go. I would say it's probably not worth going out and buying a berry specific formulation of fertilizer. So I'm gonna go ahead and mix up my vermiculite that I already put in here, that fertilizer I just added, and just mix it all in there. Okay, that should all be mixed together pretty well. I'm gonna go ahead and add a little bit of extra moisture into this potting mix. It's just a little bit drier than I want it. Basically, I always recommend that you moisten your potting mix before you actually put it into the container. It's just a lot easier to do it that way. Oh, and before I go ahead and put the potting mix in there, you'll just notice that I've already punched 3 holes into the bottom of each of the planting sections, and that's really, really important. Make sure that you have a lot of good drainage holes on these. Again, as I mentioned, strawberries, particularly certain varieties like this Fort Laramie, are very susceptible to root rot. Some varieties do a better job of resisting it, but a lot of the traditional everbearing varieties are going to get root rot really easily. So you need to make sure that the water is never basically just pooling in the container. That's really important. All right. So our little container is ready to go. Now I'm gonna go ahead and just create some holes to actually put the strawberries into. This container is probably a little bit too shallow. I would guess it's about 6 inches. I'd prefer if it was more like 8 inches, but I think it'll do the job. Okay, so we've got some planting holes ready to go in the container. Time to get our strawberries. And this is how strawberries often come from the store. They're in what's called a bare root state, which just means that the nursery is selling them in a dormant phase. So here is the root system down here, and then we have this crown right over here, which is basically just a short thickened stem, and that short thickened stem, the crown, will become the fruiting point or the growing point for the plant. And then we have the petioles coming out here, ending up in some nice leaves right there. And that's all there is to it. Now, the main thing to know about planting a bare root strawberry like this one is we want the soil line to end up above the root system. Obviously, we don't want this to dry out. We want them to be making good contact with the soil, but we don't want to be covering the top of the crown. We kind of want to be just above the root system, up onto that crown a little bit. I will say that a lot of strawberry guides kind of make it seem like if you don't get it exactly perfect, your plant is gonna rot and die and not produce, which isn't really the case. Basically, we want the root system to be covered with dirt, like any other plant, but we don't want to totally bury this crown because, again, this is going to be the growing point of the plant, and that's really all you need to know about a bare root strawberry. So what you have to do is kind of gently separate out the plants. So this is the state that I've got mine in here. Very likely this time of the year that yours are going to look something like this. It's early spring in case you're watching this later in the year. If you do have a true potted strawberry plant, obviously you wouldn't need to do this. You could just take the pot and put it in here. But since these are basically bare root, we're just gonna go ahead and stick the root system right in there. So we're gonna go ahead and just pack it in there. Looks good. I don't want too many air holes. As always, air holes or air pockets are the enemy, so I'm gonna pack it in there gently. But you do wanna make sure that those roots have good contact with the soil. Wow, that is a solid amount of roots. There's kind of these like extra little bits and bobs that would probably grow. You know, like that is basically just a little bare root strawberry plant in there, so we'll probably plant those. I'm actually going to just tear the bottom little section of rotted roots off the bottom here and declump them a little bit. Now, the last thing that I'm gonna do is add mulch. As I mentioned, these small containers, once we reach May or so, they're gonna start drying out so fast. But if I add mulch around the top, and then we've got this plastic container, we're gonna be doing a lot to prevent excessive evaporation, and then we've got those nice big drainage holes at the bottom. So any excess water can drain through, but we're not gonna be losing a ton to evaporation. Alrighty, I've just got a handful of wood chips here, and I am just going to add them around the plant. Accidentally used a strawberry plant as mulch there. That looks pretty good. So I'm gonna go ahead and do one more and finish up with our strawberry stacker here, strawberry tower. I like the way it looks so far. In terms of location, just go ahead and put your strawberry container somewhere that receives full sun, which I'm gonna go ahead and do right now. That is where they are going to do best. Now, one quick exception to that rule. If you are growing a variety, like this Fort Laramie right here, like I am, and you live in an area that gets very hot during the summer, like I do, go ahead and move your whole container somewhere that gets a little bit of afternoon shade during those hottest months of summer. For instance, like under this almond tree right here. And that way, our little strawberry container is gonna be able to withstand those scorching summers and live into the next year. But if you're growing a variety that is more suited for your climate, you don't need to. You can go ahead and just leave it in that full sun. All right, y'all, that is it for today. Just remember to keep that soil nice and evenly moist. Remember to give them an extra dose of fertilizer, say every 6 to 8 weeks. And if you did plant a variety of ever-bearing strawberries, and if you have a long enough growing season like we do here, you should be eating strawberries this year. Yep, that is right. They should bear fruit this same year. Again, so long as you planted an ever-bearing variety or a day-neutral variety. And that's all I got for you. As always, I hope to see you on the next one, and happy gardening, y'all.